They told her she wasn't supposed to be there, that the Northern Ridge Recon Center was no place for a tech sergeant with no combat deployments and a name barely known beyond her file. But Sergeant Liana Cruz didn't ask for permission to show up, she just did. Boots laced, hair in a tight knot, a scar along her jaw from a childhood accident that gave her face a crooked kind of courage, and a heart that beat steady even when everything around her was broken. Because when she arrived at Ridge Base, the mood was already fractured, like a pane of glass just waiting for the last crack. A place where tension wasn't spoken but hung like frost on every wall, and where no one expected a quiet systems analyst to be the one who would change the entire trajectory of what happened next, because Liana Cruz wasn't just there to reroute satellite links or correct communication logs, though that's what her orders said. She was there because someone needed to see what others were too afraid to look at. And the moment came fast. On her third day, when a small alert hit the corner of her screen, something tiny, something meant to be overlooked, an unlogged override on the perimeter sensors. But when she brought it up to her commanding officer, Lieutenant Voss, he barely glanced at the report, just muttered that their system glitched all the time and told her to let it go. But Liana had been trained to trust her gut more than any manual, and something in her gut twisted when she noticed the override came not from an outside force, but from inside the base. At a time when no drills were scheduled, no guards rotated, and no shifts changed, so she didn't let it go. She ran a silent trace, pulling logs she wasn't exactly cleared to touch, isolating data fragments from night patrol logs, and slowly, terrifyingly, she pieced together a pattern. Movements happening during dead zones, files being accessed from secure archives, strange gaps in surveillance, and worst of all, an encrypted message routed through the relay hub that, when decrypted using old recon cipher tables, translated to 3 words that made her blood run cold: Phase 1 complete. And that was when she realized this wasn't a mistake or a tech hiccup, but something deliberate, something buried in the bones of the base itself. And when she presented her findings to Voss again, this time with a quiet insistence that edged into urgency, his reaction didn't just scare her, it confirmed everything, because he didn't ask questions, didn't thank her, didn't even look surprised. He just leaned forward and said, very softly, "You don't want to keep digging, Sergeant." And that was the moment she understood that the threat wasn't outside the wire. It was inside it, rotting through the chain of command like rust in the hinges of a bomb shelter. And suddenly everything about Ridge made sense: the guarded silences, the off-the-record missions, the names that vanished off rosters without explanation. And she had to make a decision: stay silent and safe, or speak up and risk everything. And she chose the second, because Liana had lost her brother to silence, a Navy corpsman whose injuries in country were ignored until they weren't survivable. And she'd promised at his funeral that she would never let loyalty cost someone their life. So she dug deeper, pulling security cam backups from the system archive, using her clearance in ways that danced the edge of regulation. And what I found chilled her: footage of late-night meetings in the satellite dish array, of unmarked trucks arriving with no log, of Colonel Ryland, head of Ridge and supposed war hero, shaking hands with a civilian who had no business inside a military perimeter. And worst of all, a clear shot of Ryland handing over a sealed case marked classified to that man under the cover of darkness. No security escort, no paperwork, no accountability. And the next morning she brought the footage straight to the only person she thought might still have a soul on base: Command Sergeant Major Atos, a grizzled veteran with a steel spine and a voice that sounded like gravel under boots. And when he saw the footage, he didn't speak, didn't blink, just stood there watching it loop twice, then turned to her and said, "You know, you just lit a fire under the hornet's nest." And she nodded, already bracing for what she knew would come next. And it came fast. Just 2 hours later, when her clearance was revoked, her quarters ransacked, her access badge deactivated, and she was told she was being transferred pending an internal review for insubordination. And that's when she knew they weren't just trying to stop her, they were preparing to disappear her. So she made one last move, rerouting the footage to a secure military whistleblower server before her system went black, then walked straight to the central barracks and stood in front of everyone at chow and said, loud enough to freeze the whole room, "There's something happening here that none of you are seeing." And then 3 MPs tried to escort her out, but someone stood up: Private First Class Ezradean, who had served under her for a brief systems training course and remembered how she stayed up all night fixing a crashed server just so his team could sleep before deployment. And then another stood, and another, until 30 soldiers blocked the exit and demanded to know what she'd found. And Liana looked around at all of them, the fear in their eyes mixing with something else, something older. "Maybe on," she said, "just enough to make them understand, not enough to get them arrested, but enough to let them know that trust was being broken by the very people they saluted every day." And that night, everything spiraled, because the footage went viral across military circles, shared in encrypted forums, mirrored to journalists' inbox, and before the brass could smother the flames, they were already burning. And Colonel Ryland was placed on temporary leave, though everyone knew that meant lawyers were sharpening their knives behind closed doors, and Liana was summoned to the Joint Command Review Board, a place where truth often went to be buried under protocol and classified ink. But she walked in wearing her only set of blues, no ribbons, no makeup, just a scar on her jaw and a heart that wouldn't let go. And when the questioning began, they tried to shake her, throwing the book at her, accusing her of hacking, of endangering classified intel, of risking base integrity. But she held her ground. Every word measured, every answer backed by logs, times, names, and eventually one of the generals leaned back, rubbed his eyes, and asked the room, why didn't anyone else see this? And the answer was simple: because no one wanted to. And that's when everything changed. Because the board didn't silence her, they promoted her, not as a reward, but as a signal, a message that someone had to be accountable when loyalty goes rotten. And weeks later, Sergeant Liana Cruz walked into Northern Ridge again, this time as a warrant officer assigned to audit base integrity protocols nationwide. And as she passed the same barracks where she'd once been dragged out by MPs, someone stood and saluted, then another, until the whole quad was silent and still, saluting a tech sergeant who didn't carry a weapon, didn't command a squad, but had done something most of them never dared. She told the truth when it could have ended her. And as she walked through that gauntlet of silent respect, she didn't smile, didn't wave, she just kept walking. Because she knew this wasn't over. That corruption doesn't end with one man or one file. It hides, mutates, finds new uniforms to wear. But as long as someone like her kept watching, kept asking, kept digging, maybe the truth could win once in a while. And in the end, that was enough for her to keep going.